Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we will be finishing up our amendments from Amendment 22 all the way to Amendment 27. So let's start today with Amendment 22, Presidential Tenure. No person shall be elected to the office of the President more than twice, and no person who has held the office of President or acted as President for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected President shall be elected to the office of President more than once. Although nothing in the original Constitution limited presidential terms, the nation's first president, George Washington, declined to run for a third term, suggesting that 2 terms of 4 years were enough for any president. Washington's voluntary 2 term limit became the unwritten rule for all presidents until 1940. In that year, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had steered the nation through the Great Depression of the 1930s, won a third term and was elected in 1944 for a fourth term as well. Following President Roosevelt's death in April 1945, just months into his fourth term, Republicans in Congress sought passage of Amendment 22. FDR was the first and only president to serve more than 2 terms. The 22nd Amendment limits an elected president to 2 terms in office, a total of 8 years. However, it is possible for an individual to serve up to 10 years as president. The amendment specifies that if a vice president or other successor takes over for a president who, for whatever reason, cannot fulfill the term and serves 2 years or less of the former president's term, the new president may serve for two full 4-year terms. If more than 2 years remain of the term when the successor assumes office, the new president may serve only one additional term. Just a fun fact for you, of the 45 presidents, 4 were assassinated while in office: Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. Ironically, the first 3 presidential assassinations were all witnessed by Lincoln's eldest son. 4 presidents died while in office. Harrison died after giving a lengthy speech at his inauguration during a blizzard condition, and Taylor's death has always been met with suspicion, as many believed he died from poisoned cherries. Amendment 23, Presidential Electors for Washington, D.C. Although New York was the nation's capital when the Constitution was ratified, the capital moved to Philadelphia in 1790 for 10 years before settling in Washington, D.C. through compromise. In 1800, the District of Columbia became the official seat of the government. When first established, the town had a small population of only 5,000 residents. As a federal territory, however, and not a state, the inhabitants had neither a local government nor the right to vote in federal elections. Although by 1960 the population of the District of Columbia had swelled to over 760,000 people, and district residents had all the responsibilities of citizenship, they were required to pay federal taxes and could be drafted to serve in the military. Citizens in 13 states with lower populations had more voting rights than district residents. Amendment 23 treats the District of Columbia as if it were a state for purposes of the Electoral College, thereby giving residents of the district the right to have their votes counted in presidential elections. Significantly, Amendment 23 does not make Washington, D.C. a state. It merely grants its citizens the number of electors that it would have if it were a state, but no more than the smallest state. Nor does the amendment provide district residents with representation in Congress. D.C. residents have one non-voting delegate to the House of Representatives. Or does it change the way district is governed? Congress continues to prescribe the district's form of government. Amendment 24, Poll Taxes. The right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or representative in Congress, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. Although passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments helped remove many of the discriminatory laws left over from slavery, they did not eliminate all forms of discrimination. The 24th Amendment, ratified on January 23, 1964, was passed to address one particular injustice that prevented numerous citizens from voting: the poll tax, that is, a state fee on voting. Along with literacy tests and durational residency requirements, poll taxes were used to keep low-income, primarily African American citizens from participating in elections. The Supreme Court has since struck down the discriminatory measures, opening democratic participation to all, regardless of one's ability to pay. Amendment 25, Presidential Succession. Section 1. In case of the removal of president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Section 2. Whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. Section 3. Whenever the President transmits to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. Section 4. Whenever the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other bodies as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. So, what does all this mean? Well, the 25th Amendment was passed in order to clarify what happens upon the death, removal, or resignation of the President or Vice President, and how the presidency is temporarily filled if the President becomes disabled and cannot fulfill his responsibilities. Far from being a theoretical problem, a plan of succession has frequently been necessary. 8 presidents have died in office. One president, Richard M. Nixon, resigned. Similarly, on 7 occasions, the vice president has died in office, and one vice president, Spiro Agnew, resigned in the middle of his term. This has meant that for nearly 20% of the U.S. history, there has been no vice president in office who can assume the presidency. Now, the fourth section is the only section that has not been invoked yet. We will have to wait to see when that happens, if it happens. There have been times when this amendment has been used, specifically when Ronald Reagan and George Bush both went in for minor surgeries. They transferred their power over to their vice presidents. However, this amendment was not in effect whenever Woodrow Wilson had his stroke. He stayed behind closed doors, and believe it or not, it wasn't the vice president who ran his affairs, it was his wife. Amendment 26. Voting at 18. The right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. Amendment 26 gives young adults between the ages of 18 and 21 the right to vote. The measure is another in a line of constitutional changes that expanded the right to vote to more citizens. At the time of the ratification of the Constitution in 1788, most states limited voting to white male citizens who were over the age of 21. It took 82 years for African American slaves to gain a constitutional right to vote, 132 years for women's suffrage, and 183 years for those 18 to 21 years to join the voting population. The impetus for this change was the passage of the amendments to the Voting Rights Act in 1970 that set 18 as the minimum voting age for both federal and state elections. But when the Supreme Court ruled in Oregon versus Mitchell that the law applied only to federal, not state elections, Congress adopted the 26th and states quickly ratified it thereafter. Amendment 27, Congressional Pay Raises. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. Amendment 27 prevents members of Congress from granting themselves pay raises during the current session. Rather, any raises that are adopted must take effect during the next session of Congress. Proponents of the amendment believe that legislators are more likely to be cautious about increasing congressional pay if they have no personal stake in the vote. The amendment was introduced in Congress in 1789 by James Madison and sent to the states for ratification at that time. It was not until 1992, however, after public displeasure with repeated congressional pay increases, that the required three-quarters of the states ratified this measure. Unlike several other recent amendments which contained a 7-year time limit for ratification by the states, Madison's proposed amendment contained no limit. Again, if you remember what I told you in the beginning, this was one of the very first amendments that were put in under the Bill of Rights. Remember, there were 12. It's finally going to pass in 1992. So that's a wrap on our constitutional rights and laws. What do you think will be our next amendment? And will it happen in the near future? After all, there have only been 17 changes in the last 220 years. Have a great day, Mount Pleasant.